Well, staying with the Middle East now, or going to the Middle East rather, negotiators trying to finalize a Gaza ceasefire deal in Qatar have indicated that an agreement is closer than ever. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has met senior security officials to discuss the proposals. An announcement is expected in the coming days, but mediators are warning that it could still go wrong. Let's now bring in Associate Professor of Political Science and International Relations and the Director of the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg, Professor David Monyae. Prof, a very good afternoon to you. So, as we look at developments, Prof, in the Middle East and the ceasefire talks currently underway, let's first talk about the factors of the negotiations. Indications are that the ceasefire deal in Gaza is at the closest point it's ever been in the past few months. Your thoughts?
Oh, indeed. These are promising developments. I think with the inauguration of President Trump on the 20th and the threats that he had made, even though it came in a negative way in terms of threatening that should the Palestinians, Hamas, do not release the hostages, he is going to really cause havoc. And hell is going to break loose in that region. But besides that, I think there is an issue of a number of players who are involved in the negotiation that are contributing positively, particularly Doha, and we have Egypt playing a very critical role. And without really putting much of South Africa also in its own way, taking Israel to ICC has also contributed significantly in terms of pushing Israel and also encouraging peace in that part of the world.
Yeah, so we know that more than 46,000 people have been killed in the Palestinian region, some people saying actually even more. So the potential of this ceasefire does bring some hope, especially to those in Gaza. But what would a ceasefire mean for the broader Israel-Palestine question, especially when you consider ongoing issues such as blockades, settlements, and the two-state solution? Others obviously saying that this solution, more than ever, needs to be brought forward.
I think in the immediate, we welcome the negotiations and more so the promised breakthrough to really stop the killing. I think if you look at the more promising breakthrough that was promised in July last year, from July last year up to now, more than 10,000 Palestinians have died. And it is really, as the case with Ukraine, and these are wars that are really causing havoc on the ground for civilians. And it's unnecessary, and politics are at play. And no doubt that Prime Minister Netanyahu waited for President Biden to be out of White House and to allow President Trump to come in, because there's absolutely no reason why there shouldn't be any ceasefire. Ceasefire first to stop the killings and really come up with a second phase of negotiations to ensure that less people die and really to bring in the question of long-lasting peace, talking in terms of a two-state living side by side, Israeli state as well as the Palestinian, a viable, peaceful, independent, sovereign Palestinian state that is supported by international community. And that in itself needs to be encouraged, and pressure needs to be exerted on both parties to ensure that we achieve that desired goal.
Briefly mentioned Trump. I want to talk about the U.S. involvement here now. Of course, President Biden's comments recently, showing optimism of a ceasefire on the cards. How would you define his role in this conflict, considering that there's also the potential, of course, of massive involvement on the side of President-elect Donald Trump, who will be inaugurated and will take office next week?
I think for President Trump, he is trying to make it quite clear that throughout the campaign, he wanted to ensure that all the promises that he had made are coming to fruition. So that in itself, it's assisting in terms of pushing the players in. But at the end of the day, it's not the first time. In 1979, with another crisis, a hostage crisis in Iran, we saw the late President Qatar losing votes to President Reagan due to internal domestic U.S. politics, waiting for one president to be out of power and allowing the other one to come with a big bang to show the world, Americans, that he is the main person that brought peace and security. In that case, it was the Iranian issue and now the Palestinian question.
I mean, some say it will be too early, to look at long-term implications, especially in the region, but this is long in the making. What role and influence would you say regional powers like Iran, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, just to name a few, have played? And how do you think these countries are now viewing this current development with a potential ceasefire?
Indeed. I think what we are seeing is that the situation in the United States is highly volatile in terms of internal U.S. politics, and these have a spill effect on the world. And in this case, I think we are seeing an incoming president that is so strong on foreign policy, America first. I think what he is doing is to demonstrate that he is going to bring as well as making himself different from President Biden, who is perceived to much more of being a warmonger. Wars in Ukraine, the very same Middle East, which President Trump makes it quite clear, if he was in White House, these wars wouldn't have been taking place. And therefore, it's a wait and see with his inauguration and the current negotiations in the Middle East, if they will bring indeed the peace that we're all waiting for.
Prof, I think you were interrupted there towards that question at the end, but just your thoughts finally as we wrap, just your thoughts on those countries that I mentioned earlier in terms of Egypt, Saudi Arabia and Iran, how they would be reading into this potential ceasefire.
I think for Egypt, it is not just a Middle East issue. It has domestic implication for its own internal issues. So applies to Doha. And if you remember, at some point there was a blockade on Doha during the first Trump administration. So all these countries are intimately involved and it is in their best interest to ensure that there is peace between the Palestinian and the Israeli, as well as for us in Africa and the world. There is a need for peace in that part of the world to ensure that the world can move and deal with other pending crises as we see in Ukraine and on our own continent. We have crises in Sudan, in the DRC and so many other places that needs similar attention as we are putting on the Middle East.
All right, Prof, thank you so much for your time and your analysis. Let's leave it there for now. Professor David Monyae just weighing in on the potential ceasefire in Gaza as negotiators are trying, we understand, to finalize that particular deal in Qatar.